Are you new to project management or thinking about breaking in? Then you've probably opened one of the job descriptions for project manager before, and within the first 3 bullet points, you've already hit 5 words you've never seen before, never heard of before. Stakeholders, governance, scope, change request. What does all of this actually mean? Now, you could ask ChatGPT, but what you most often get back is just a more complicated definition of the same confusing word. So in this video, I'm going to break down 10 key project management terms in the simplest way. And I'm going to illustrate every single one with a real example from a project that I previously led, just to give it a little bit more context. By the end of this video, you'll be able to read a project management job description and actually understand what they're asking for. Let's get into it. The first word, project. Let's start at the very beginning, because even this word gets used loosely and confused with other words lots of times. So a project is a temporary piece of work with a clear goal, a start date, and an end date. It's not the same as your day-to-day job. It has a specific thing that it is trying to achieve, and once that thing is achieved, the project is done. For example, the bank that I worked for wanted customers to use their mobile banking app more often. So they started a project. They wanted to add new features to the app, things like instant payments, personalized spending insights, and so on, to make the customers actually want to use it more often. The project had a clear goal to increase customer usage of the mobile banking app, a defined timeline, which was 1 year, and a dedicated team that was pulled together to actually work on this. Now that's a project. Once the features were live and the project was delivered, the team then moved on to different tasks. And the ongoing maintenance of this app, that's operations. That is not project, because that's an ongoing work and it doesn't have a clear end date in that sense. Second up, business requirements gathering. Before any work starts on a project, you need to understand what the business actually wants. What are the business's goals with that specific project? That's what requirement gathering is, basically. You can think of it like a wish list. You go around to everyone who has a stake in the project. So for example, you're asking customers, you're going to ask your manager, you're going to ask different team members, and you go to them and you ask, what do you need? What problem are we trying to solve with this project? What would a good outcome look like for you? And then you collect all of that, you write it down, document it, and you make sure you understood it correctly. That wish list is in its core requirement gathering. Now, for example, before any development started with my app project, I sat down with the marketing team, the product team, and customer service, and many other different team members. We were asking what features were customers constantly asking for, what were their biggest complaints, what did we see in the app reviews, and what do we see in the customer journey when people are actually dropping off and not using the app anymore. Then I collected all of the input from everyone and documented it. Now that became the wish list of the project to make sure that the project actually delivers value. Third term is project scope. Now here's where people often get confused, because scope sounds kind of like the same thing as requirements, but it's not. Let me explain why. So the requirements, as I just mentioned, are the wish list. The scope is what you actually decide or actually agree to do. Because the reality is that the wish list, so the requirements, they're almost always longer than what's actually possible within the time and budget that you're given. So after gathering all of the requirements, you sit down again and you make a decision. What makes it into the project and what doesn't. And that scope is that final agreed list. Everything inside it gets built, everything outside of it stays out of it. So coming back to my app project, for example, after gathering all the requirements, I had a long list of things that the business wanted, like instant payments, spending insights. They wanted a referral program. They really would have liked a chatbot that customers can talk to. They wanted to redesign the login screen and many more. But we only had 1 year and a fixed budget, so we made the decision based on prioritization. Instant payments, spending insights, and the redesigned home screen made it in. The chatbot and the referral program didn't. Not because they were bad ideas, but because when we're looking at cost and time to build all of these features versus the actual customer use, they weren't as valuable as some of the other features. So this final prioritized list was what we agreed on, and that was our project scope. Now let's move on to deliverables. They are related to scope, but more specific. So a deliverable is anything tangible that the project produces and hands over to the stakeholders in the end. It could be a document, it could be a piece of software, a report, a finished design, or actually a finished physical product. And at the end of the project, or at a certain point along the way, you deliver these things to whoever needs them, most likely the project sponsors or the other stakeholders involved. So to give you a bit more context, for example, in my project, we had several deliverables. So we had the instant payment feature in the app, which was one deliverable. We had the spending insights dashboard, but also we had the test results that showed that all of these features were actually working correctly, which was one deliverable in and of itself. Each deliverable is something concrete that I can point to and say, hey, this is done, this is what we built, this is what it looks like, and we're now handing it over to you. Moving on to number 5. So now you know what you're building, what you're delivering, but who's actually in charge? Who makes the big decisions? That's what the project governance is for. The project governance is basically a set of rules that decides how a project is run. So who has the authority to make decisions? Who approves things, and how do problems get escalated and to whom? In the context of my banking app project, the governance meant that I, as the project manager, made day-to-day decisions, but the bigger decisions, like changing the timeline or even increasing the budget, that had to go to the app department manager for approval. And certain decisions, like anything touching security, compliance, legal, that needed an actual sign-off from the legal and risk team specifically, and that was very well documented in the project governance. Moving on to number 6, the steering committee. A steering committee is a group of senior people, executives, usually leaders that come from different parts of the business, who oversee the project from above. They don't really do the day-to-day work on the project, but their job is to make the big calls, the big decisions, while making sure that the project is overall always aligned with the business goals. Their roles and accountabilities are also documented in the project governance that we talked about previously. Now, for example, in my project, it looked like this. My steering committee included the head of product, the CTO, and the head of customer experience. We met twice a month, and I, as the project manager, presented where things stood. I flagged anything that needed a decision above my level, and I included a recommendation based on my analysis, and they then either approve or redirect. Now, if you see steering committee reporting in a job description, this is what they mean. You'll be the one preparing those updates and running those meetings to mainly senior executives in the organization. Moving on to number 7, the kickoff meeting. Now, the governance is set up, the scope is agreed, you have all of the requirements gathered together, and it's officially time to start. That's what the kickoff is for. A kickoff meeting is the official first meeting of the project. It's the moment where everyone who's involved, all of the stakeholders who have a stake in the project, they come together for the first time to align on what the project is, why it matters, who is doing what, and how the team will actually work together. It sets the tone for everything that follows. In my banking project, I ran a kickoff with the full project team, with the developers, designers, the testers, the product owner, and all of the other key stakeholders and executives from the business that were involved. Together, we then walked through the project goals, the project scope, the timeline, and the governance that we had agreed on. By the end of that meeting, everyone in the room knew exactly what we were doing and what their role was. Number 8, risk management. This is another term that you'll likely read in one of the PM job descriptions. Now, for risk management, the project manager's job is to look ahead and spot problems before they actually happen. Risk management, in its core, is the process of identifying things that could go wrong, deciding how likely they are actually going to happen, and then making a plan for what you would do if things actually went wrong. Now, what could that look like? One risk on my project was that adding new features to the app could somehow breach the security of the customer's data, which would then mean both damage to the customers, of course, as well as potential fines and also reputation loss for the bank as a whole. Because we were changing so much in the app, that risk was actually quite likely to happen, and the impacts would have been severe. So from day one, we involved the bank's security and compliance team directly in the project. They reviewed every feature design before the development even started. And we had a mandatory sign-off checkpoint built into the timeline, so nothing could launch without their green light. We also made sure that all new features followed the existing data protection standards that the bank already had in place. Those were some of the risk mitigating actions that we had planned and documented in the risk register beforehand. This way, we're prepared for the worst. Now, luckily, this risk never actually became an issue, but that's exactly the point. Because even if it would have done, we would have had a plan to mitigate it and to do damage control early on. Term number 9, change request. Now, even the best planned projects sometimes get asked to change direction. And a change request is the formal way that this happens. A change request is basically an official ask to change something about the project, like the scope, the timeline, the budget, or the way something is being built. And the keyword is official. Instead of someone just verbally going, oh, can we maybe add this? A change request makes this formal. It documents the impact of this change and it requires proper approval, mostly from the steering committee, before anything can change. So, for example, halfway through my banking project, the marketing team came to me and they said, hey, we want to add a referral program feature to the app because we've seen it with competitors and it's working really well. Now, this was clearly something that wasn't in the original scope. So I raised a formal change request. I documented what it would require to implement this extra feature. So we would, for example, need 2 extra developers. We would need 3 additional weeks. Then the steering committee reviewed the change request and they decided that the feature was worth it. They approved the extra resource and we updated the plan and got going. Now, that's how it should work. There's no surprises, no chaos, just a clear decision. And finally, number 10, the status report. A status report is a regular update, usually weekly or bi-weekly, that tells everyone involved in the project how things are actually going. Are we on track? Are we on budget? Has anything been completed yet? Are there any bottlenecks or risks that have been flagged? It keeps both the steering committee and the key stakeholders and the project team informed without them needing to attend every single meeting or chase the project manager for updates so they know what's actually going on. So for example, again, in my app project, every Friday, I would send a 1-page status report to the steering committee and to the senior stakeholders. Green meant that everything was on track, amber meant there was something to watch, and red meant we had a problem that needed a fast decision. That simple traffic light system meant that even people who weren't in the day-to-day and weren't super informed about the status of the project could still see at a glance where things stood. For this, I personally like to keep it simple and just give it 2 to 3 sentences on each relevant area of the project to describe the status, describe a risk, or describe the next action. So if a job description mentions stakeholder reporting or project status updates, this is exactly what that means. So there you have it, 10 project management terms with a real example behind every single one. To recap the order we went through, you start with understanding what a project is, then you gather all of the requirements to understand what you're building and what the goal of that project is. You define the scope to put a boundary around what is inside and what is outside of the project, and then you agree on certain deliverables that you will produce. You set up a governance so that everyone knows who decides what. You establish a steering committee for the big calls, including all of the executives and maybe board members. Then you hold a kickoff meeting for the project where you bring everyone into a virtual or a physical actual room and get everyone on the same page about the project. What is also part of a project is managing the risks before they actually become problems. And when certain things come up and your project needs a change, then you put in a formal change request, which is then approved by the steering committee before you can move on with actually implementing those changes. Finally, you keep everyone involved in the project through regular status reports. And now when you read those words in the job description, I hope it became a little bit clearer what they're actually asking for. If there's a project management term you've come across that still confuses you, drop it in the comments and I'll have a look at it and reply to you as soon as possible. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this helpful at all, give it a like, subscribe for more content like this, and I'll see you in the next video.